Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today I've got a list of my top 10 albums of 2022. I think this year as a whole has been pretty decent for music in general. I do think that this last quarter of the year has been a little bit sparse with the exception of October and some of November, but even still there's been a lot of highs, definitely some pretty abysmal lows as well, but here I've got my best of the best for this year. I'm going to start out with a few honorable mentions. These albums aren't necessarily the most amazing albums of this year. These were mostly chosen because I found their releases noteworthy, and even though they didn't necessarily make the list, I just thought I would throw some thoughts out there on these ones. First off, for honorable mentions, I've got Björk's Fosora. This album was really fantastic, easily one of the most abstract and artful albums of the year. My issue with it has mostly just been that I haven't really felt sucked back into it. I have re-listened to this a handful of times, and on repeat listens, I still find it good, excellent even, but it is one of those albums that is far better to listen to in one sitting instead of just chunking it out, which means if I want to listen to this thing, I have to actively go out of my way for this album, which is fine. There's plenty of albums like that, but with the material being so far beyond a lot of the more typical stuff that I listen to, I hardly feel the urge to work it in. The next honorable mention is Megadeth's 16th studio album, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, and I think I made a lot of my thoughts pretty clear in my review for this one. While I think probably half of this album's material is good, and the other half was decent at best and cringeworthy at worst, I am still very heavily biased when it comes to pretty much anything Dave Mustaine is involved with output-wise. Even though I think a pretty good chunk of this album is not very great, it is still an album that has kept me coming back, and had I not been a fan of this band, I could see that not being the case, but even still, with this album being a return after 6 years, they did a pretty bang-up job. And really the only thing that I find lamentable about this album cycle is the music videos that they keep dropping seemingly like once a month or so, which are just awful. For my next honorable mention, I'm going with Toxic's first album in over 30 years, Dismorta. This album does have some issues, but they are all rooted in the same problems that thrash has as a genre. In an isolated environment, Toxic managed to really pull out all of the stops for this return. And it really does just sound like the band was frozen since 1989 and then were thawed out, and with some minor adjustments were just primed and ready to go. And all things considered, there have been far worse attempts at reuniting dead thrash bands, so it's good to actually see something good come out of that with some net positive results. And for my last honorable mention, I wanted to say that the newest BB No Money album, Bag or Die, is great. It is easily one of the better rap albums this year that doesn't have a strong social message behind it. I love a lot of the very aware and big brain modern rap, but Bag or Die is just a fun album, and I wish more music that was this fun was this good, because in most cases, the whole excuse of like, oh man, it's fun, like the quality doesn't have to be all that great, like it's just a fun record, man, give it a break. But in a lot of cases, a lot of those albums that are just for fun they're hard to listen to. Anyway, it's time to get into the list proper. These albums, in my opinion, are the absolute best of what 2022 has to offer. And some of these albums have shifted dramatically compared to what number rating I gave them, and where they ended up on this list. It is okay, we're doing this for fun. We like to have fun here. Number 10 is Blood Incantation's boundary-pushing, expectation-breaking Time Wave Zero. Beyond just being a local favorite of mine, Blood Incantation, I think, are one of the most important bands for death metal as a whole right now, because they are truly one of the freshest acts to come along in years. And even though this album is much closer to Klaus Schultz ambient synth worship than to the standard Demi-Lich worship like their previous efforts, Hidden History of the Human Race or Starspawn, I would argue that this album still very much encapsulates the entire idea behind this band. And I think a lot of the idea here was to push people beyond the standard palette of death or Cannibal Corpse-inspired death metal and into more abstract landscapes that, while unfamiliar, are just as comfortable. This is easily one of the best albums of the year, and with every release, Blood Incantation lurches forward into being truly one of the most important bands of the past couple decades. Up next at number 9, we've got Boris with their January release, W. Boris is ridiculously prolific to the point that I figured they were probably going to end up on this list at some point or another anyway, just with the sheer amount of material that they do put out. It's no King Gizzard, mind you, but between albums and splits and collaborations, these guys really do just kind of throw a lot of material just out into the ether. And I think their album W was an absolutely wonderful collection of tracks that went far far beyond a lot of the typical walls of roaring static and low-end sludge into an almost dreamlike excursion. I think 2022 was a particularly strong year for Boris, with another heavy rocks album dropping several months later, and while I did like that for what it was, I think W really was the more adventurous project, and ultimately one of the more interesting albums they've put out in recent memory. For number 8, we're going with Danger Mouse and Black Thought's Cheat Codes. As far as rap goes this year, there's been quite a lot of actually really good and really bad albums. And I know that's a bit of an understatement, but normally I feel like a lot of very good, notable rap albums usually don't drop this close to each other. I mean, I feel like it's been a good few years since we've had this many really good rap records in this short of an amount of time. And truth be told, a lot of these 90s hip-hop style heavy albums were in rotation for this spot on this list. I actually almost put Czarface's Zarmageddon here, but I think Cheat Codes as an album has a really good balance of new ideas and tried and true strategies that come together for one of the better projects of the year. I still absolutely love the tracks Aquamarine and the posthumous MF Doom feature on Belize, which is hair-raising. For number 7 on this list, I'm going with Vermin Womb's Retaliation. One of the most blistering and punishing 20-minute albums out there, and easily one of my favorites for this year. Retaliation is the long-awaited follow-up to 2016's Decline, and Retaliation is an improvement on that project in pretty much every way. It is faster, it is more animalistic. It's basically a Primitive Man record, but instead of being bludgeoned to death with rusty pieces of metal, it's like arming a Neanderthal with an M60. And I know it's obviously a separate project to Primitive Man, but there are comparisons to be made, obviously, with Ethan McCarthy on vocals. He kind of just is any band he's in, even his noise projects are distinctly his. Anyway, this album's 12 tracks are paced so quickly, you might as well just listen to the whole thing in one sitting, because it's only 18 minutes long. From the beginning of the first track, Crumbling World Without Joy, through the end of the album, the whole experience is nearly flawless. For number 6, I'm going with Denzel Curry's monumental Melt My Eyes, See Your Future. Another album that I feel proves my point about the abundance of high-quality hip-hop that's dropped this year. Melt My Eyes is not the most consistent album all the way through, but it is absolutely one of the more memorable records that has had some really strong staying power for me. And I've gone through cycles with this album of digging into it a lot and then kind of just letting it sit for a while, and every time that I've come back to it, I find more and more things to like. Personally, for an entry point into Curry's work, I think that this is one of the best places you can get a start. Favorites from this album are probably Melt Session 1, The Last, Mental, and Zatoichi. For number 5, I'm going with Porcupine Tree's Closure Continuation. Porcupine Tree has been a favorite band of mine for a very long time now. I think for a lot of kids who are figuring out their music taste, Porcupine Tree is one of the first bands you find when you start to venture past classic prog rock into the more modern scene. The pipeline seems to be finding Tool, then Porcupine Tree, then God forbid it's a slippery slope into prog metal like Anathema or Richelieu. And I checked all of those boxes, but over time I have retracted my appreciation back a bit from prog metal because it very quickly falls into technical wankery, which I frankly don't have the patience for anymore. And my worry here was that for the return of Porcupine Tree from their very long-awaited hiatus was that this new project would be far more in line with their later, more metal-focused material, which I do like, but it leans far more heavy into that prog metal sound, which I'm just not super keen on. And instead, what we got was a really, really well-balanced album that toes the line between the heavier, more modern side of their discography and their classic style from albums like Up the Down Stair or Signify. And I'm still a little bit annoyed about the seemingly meaningless different versions of the albums with more or less tracks, but the core 7 songs on this album I think are great all around. I do think Dignity is a little bit long-winded and Of the New Day is maybe a little bit underwhelming, but it is nice to have new material from Steven Wilson that isn't just sort of an okay pop record. I'm sure this next one will leave no one surprised by its inclusion. Number 4 on this list is Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. 80 goddamn minutes of material seems to be the thing for a lot of rap albums lately. And while I can't say I go through this thing in one sitting every time like I probably should, this is one of the best albums of the year. Kendrick is sharper, more focused, and frankly more interesting to listen to than he was on Damn, which in my opinion has like 2.5 good songs. The whole Damnation conspiracy shit sure was something, wasn't it? Anyway, I really love that Kendrick manages to almost one-up himself compared to Pimp a Butterfly without just copying that format of the album like a lot of artists would probably try to do. I don't think I really need to explain how big of an album To Pimp a Butterfly is. If you're watching this, you probably watched Fantana, let's be honest. He has the market cornered on probably the best take onto To Pimp a Butterfly. Anyway, the point of that tangent is a lot of musicians write themselves into redundancy, and with any luck, Kendrick will continue to pace himself well enough to keep dropping really great projects. As far as favorites go, I absolutely love Worldwide Steppers. Auntie Diaries, while it is filled with some kind of whack takes, I still really enjoy for the unusual storytelling. Mother I Sober is one of the most heartbreaking and devastating songs I've ever heard. I almost want to say that track specifically specifically is one of, if not the best track he has ever written. Next up in the number 3 spot is Chat Pile's debut full-length record, God's Country. God, this thing is fucking good. It's like Swans and Have a Nice Life and Planning for Burial and any noisy post-rock sludge shoegaze group just all ground into one rippling mass. I absolutely loved the EPs that preceded this album, with Remove Your Skin Please still being one of my favorite releases from them, and still, they stay true on their upwards trajectory. I love Slaughterhouse with its almost twisted Alice in Chains style riffs. Wicked Puppet Dance is basically a Melvins track done as good, if not better, than any proper Melvins track. Anywhere is basically just a prime shoegaze track mashed into an explosive, fizzing and ripping song. I love the varied vocal work on this track. The Mask still throws me for a huge loop with the roaring "Light up the animals" lyric for the chorus. And the final suite of I Don't Care If I Burn and Grimace Smoking Weed.jpg are just total insanity. Love it, love it, love it. And for number 2, I'm going with Author and Punisher's Crueler. There are so few albums this uncompromisingly creative and boundary pushing, especially in the world of industrial or sludge metal. Beastland, the last record from Author and Punisher, was intriguing. Crueler is so far beyond that, I don't know if there's a good word I can pull to describe it in one word. It's one of those albums that you can feel came together exactly how it needs to. It's taking all of the best parts of industrial and sludge and coming away with this hybrid creation that is like an audio Cronenberg creation. I have always kind of thought that the rail gauntlet that Tristan Schoen put together as one of the main MIDI controllers for this project was like some kind of fusion of flesh and steel, like the gun that fuses with James Wood in Videodrome. I think one of the best parts of this record is the surprisingly compelling melodies that they're working with here, while still staying the course of being incredibly heavy tracks pretty much all the way through, with some intense low droning notes doing a lot of the heavy lifting during the lighter moments on the album. I love Drone Carrying Dread. The music video for that is fantastic. Watch it if you haven't. Maiden Star, also beautiful. Misery, fantastic. The Portishead cover of Glory Box is outstanding. I just really love all the tracks here for one reason or another. It's an exceptional record. Alright, we've reached the number 1 spot, and when I reviewed this album, I would not have anticipated this, but Viagra Boys' Cave World has become one of the quickest albums to grow on me that I've ever had the pleasure of listening to. And thus, it takes the number 1 spot. I can't believe I gave this thing, what, a 7? What the fuck was I thinking? Like, this is a very nearly perfect record. I still usually honestly skip Punk Rock Loser, but it's still a good track, but every single aspect of this album is just so goddamn good. This is 40 minutes of no frills, no bullshit, entirely necessary, just enough variety music. I think of all of the albums I have reviewed this year, this might be the one that I have revisited the most, and to me that means it might as well just be my album of the year because it is just brilliant. The Cognitive Trade-Off Hypothesis is one of the best songs ever fucking written. I am saying it right now. This is a good hill to die on. Viagra Boys have really outdone themselves, and I really hope that whatever comes next manages to top this somehow, but it's gonna be really fucking hard. I remember sometime just before this album came out, I was on the music board for 4chan, and someone had made a thread about these guys that basically just called them obvious industry plants. And even if that were to be true, I don't really give a shit. This album is absolutely my favorite for this year, and frankly, it's going to give whatever is number 1 next year a run for its money. Anyway, that is a list of my top 10 albums of 2022. Go and check out all of these records. They are all worth your time. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what your top albums of the year are in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe. Check out my Instagram, my Reverb, and my Depop. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you again on the flip side.